Okay, let's just jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something that goes way beyond the breaking news alerts on your phone. We're looking at the profound, often totally unseen, and incredibly long-term consequences of major terror events. Think of it as the hidden costs, the invisible forces that literally reshape nations from the inside out.
You know, it's pretty easy to see the immediate physical damage on the news, right? The broken buildings, the emergency response. But we really have to ask ourselves, how do these shockwaves truly alter the underlying systems of our world over time? What actually happens to the money, the politics, and everyday people long after the physical dust has settled?
To make sense of all this, we're going to map out these consequences across four main areas: the economic toll, political disengagement, a crisis of governance, and finally, fracturing society. Let's get into it. Starting off with Section 1, the economic toll, from markets to minds. So let's start with the outermost ring of this ripple effect. We're talking about the complete dislocation of economic activities. Terrorism literally halts development. I mean, it drags an entire economy to a standstill. The sources we're looking at highlight stunted industrial growth in places like Jammu and Kashmir, where the industrial sector seriously lags behind due to all the persistent instability. And obviously, there's the massive, immediate loss of life and property. Think back to the sheer physical and financial rubble of 9/11, or those devastating blasts in huge commercial hubs like Delhi and Mumbai. The immediate shock is staggering for sure, but the economic story definitely doesn't end there. Because as a direct reaction to this constant threat, national priorities violently shift. Funds that are so desperately meant for social welfare, building infrastructure, and public health, they get pulled away. They're diverted into massive defense budgets. To put that into perspective, India currently holds the seventh largest defense budget in the entire world. That is just a colossal amount of capital being redirected purely to secure the state. And this next point brilliantly illustrates that massive diversion of developmental funds. Alongside having that seventh largest defense budget, India actually ranks as the world's second largest importer of arms. That's not just a casual stat. It represents billions of dollars acting as this invisible hidden tax imposed by terrorism. Money that could have easily built schools and hospitals is instead completely tied up in combating threats. Plus, financial markets absolutely despise unpredictability. They react instantly and usually aggressively to instability. We saw this vividly when shares in Mumbai opened 1.5% lower and threatened to completely plummet on the very first day of trading right after the tragic 26/11 attacks. Investor confidence just vanishes when violence strikes. But the really crucial takeaway here is that market uncertainty lingers way longer than most people realize. For instance, financial markets literally shut down post 9/11. They didn't just bounce right back a few days later. According to the data, those markets didn't genuinely recover their footing until months after the 2003 invasion of Iraq. That is years, literally years of economic hesitation and slowed global growth tied directly back to a single horrific event. Now, the standard rule of thumb is that terrorism usually drives foreign investment away completely because businesses naturally avoid risk. But here is a really fascinating geopolitical exception highlighted in our sources. Look at Pakistan. Despite suffering from severe, ongoing terrorism, Pakistan still receives massive sums of investment from China through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. It just goes to show that while capital usually flees from terror, massive, sweeping geopolitical strategies can sometimes override those market fears. Okay, before we move on from the economy, we absolutely have to talk about a hidden cost that bridges the gap between the economy and the individual: psychological trauma. Interestingly, the source material groups this trauma heavily under the economic and developmental toll, simply because mental health directly impacts human capital. You can actually track how this psychological burden escalates. It starts at step 1 with the transient acute stress and bereavement immediately following an attack. Then it moves into step 2, acute stress disorder. And finally, it cements into step 3, severe long-term conditions like PTSD and depression. This profound psychological burden severely limits a population's ability to even participate in the economy. Let's move to Section 2, political disengagement and the loss of democratic faith. So, when the economy is struggling and psychological trauma is running high, it creates severe political apathy, especially among the youth. When terror just becomes a routine part of life in a region, the primary casualty is trust in the system itself. Young people who really should be the future of the political process become incredibly skeptical of it. And cut off from those democratic avenues, they're often actively misled by militant propaganda from groups like LET, also known as Lashkar-e-Taiba. They become totally alienated.
We've seen this alienation spark into massive public unrest, like during the fallout of the killing of militant commander Burhan Wani in Kashmir. The political process just loses its grip on the next generation entirely.
The harsh reality of this lost trust is perfectly captured in the numbers. Check this out. In the 2017 Srinagar Lok Sabha by-polls, there was a shockingly tiny 7.14% voter turnout. Over 92% of the population simply did not participate because of violence and disillusionment. I mean, when voter turnout is that incredibly low, the credibility of any elected representative is completely undermined. The democratic system effectively stalls out.
Which brings us to Section 3, a crisis of governance and the erosion of trust and order. Once that political disengagement really takes root, a government without a solid mandate seriously struggles to govern. The public's faith in their leaders just erodes. And this isn't just some passive dissatisfaction either. It morphs into active frustration. In regions like Kashmir, our sources note that this severe decrease in public belief physically manifests in daily life. Most notably, we see it in widespread incidences of stone pelting across the valley. It's literally a direct physical symptom of a totally collapsed relationship between the state and the citizen. And because of that eroded trust, basic law and order rapidly deteriorates. The situation becomes highly combustible. This leads to a huge increase in attacks on police and security forces. It's a dynamic that gets fatally worse when militants start gaining sympathy and support from local folks who just feel completely abandoned by the state. And honestly, this isn't isolated to just one region. The sources point out a strikingly similar breakdown of law and order in areas affected by left-wing extremism, like regions dealing with Maoist insurgencies. The pattern of this governmental crisis is exactly the same. Finally, we reach Section 4, fracturing society, and the disintegration of the social fabric. This is where the deepest, truly long-lasting damage of terrorism resides. Down at this level, entire ways of life are just caught in the crossfire. Take the tribal communities living in areas plagued by left-wing extremism, for instance. Their traditional ways of life are deeply and perhaps permanently disturbed. These locals find themselves trapped in this terrifying middle ground. They face constant harassment and pressure from Maoist forces demanding loyalty on one side and police forces demanding intelligence on the other. The whole community structure just starts to buckle under the weight of that dual threat. When the pressure gets to be too much, this societal breakdown frequently results in massive forced displacements. People are forced to flee their ancestral homes simply to survive. A really poignant example provided in the text is the historic exodus of Kashmiri pundits during the 1990s insurgency. Thousands of families were uprooted, which completely altered the demographic and cultural makeup of the region forever. You're literally watching the tragic disintegration of a society in real time. Ultimately, this is the final goal, and definitely the most insidious cost of terrorism. It succeeds in replacing natural social cohesion and neighborly trust with a perpetual, suffocating atmosphere of fear, suspicion, and panic. It divides neighbors, it totally segregates communities, and it paralyzes daily life. When suspicion replaces solidarity, the terrorists have achieved their core objective of fracturing society. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to ask yourself, once the physical dust settles, how long does it take for a society to rebuild trust after fear has taken root? We've traced this ripple effect all the way from economic dislocation, straight through political apathy, down to the total collapse of governance and the fracturing of communities. And understanding this systemic ripple is absolutely crucial. Why? Because while buildings and infrastructure can be repaired in a matter of months with enough money, rebuilding a shattered social fabric, actually learning to trust your neighbor and your institutions again, might take generations. That is the true hidden cost of terrorism. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.